You're listening to the Aesthetic Business Masters podcast, where we dive into the business of beauty, aesthetics, and innovation. I'm your host, Nicole Montgomery, and every week I sit down with the visionaries, innovators, and experts who are shaping the future of our industry. Today's guest is a true disruptor in the skin health space, a scientist, educator, and formulator. Dr. Belal Chami is the founder of Redox Skin Lab, a brand that is changing the way we think about skin health on a cellular level. We're talking about Senolytic therapy, the science behind simplifying skincare, and why what you put on your skin can be more powerful than what you take orally. Dr. Belal Chami is an academic researcher and head of R&D at Redox Skin Lab. His research area examines antioxidants, reactive oxygen species, and inflammation in the setting of chronic inflammatory etiologies. Chami has held fellowships, industry grants, as well as a competitive national and international agencies. Dr. Belal Chami has a proven track record in the field of biomedical research, publishing over 30 peer-reviewed papers, 2 book chapters, 4 review articles, a patent, and 2 invited editorial, and is enlisted as a reviewer, board member in many prominent journals, including Antioxidants and Redox Reports. Currently, Dr. Chami leads the R&D group at Redox Skin Lab, which focuses on innovation in topical approaches targeting mechanisms relating to cellular dysfunction and aging. Dr. Chami, welcome to the show. You've got such a unique perspective blending scientific research with skin health innovation. So let's start at the beginning. What inspired your journey into skin care and health, and what led you to create Redox Skin Lab?
Firstly, thank you for having me on the show. This podcast, it's always a great opportunity to chat again virtually or in person. I've been actually involved in research for cell health. So I've always been primarily interested in cell health. For the last 13 years, my research has looked at cellular health during inflammation, cellular health during damage, during oxidative damage, and how cells can benefit from antioxidants. I've always had that interest looking at what causes cell damage and how cells respond when they are damaged. And then I guess skewed in the last 4 years to research still involving cell damage, but involving the skin. And the skin's a very unique organ because when you think of all the other organs in our body, skin being the largest, none of which are exposed to as many toxins and oxidants and pollutants as the skin is. And so the example would be that most of our organs are actually nestled inside us in our cavities, and so they don't have the exposure. So the only trauma they have is what we call biological trauma. So that's the trauma of just cells being alive. They have to deal with endogenous or like local sources of damage and injury, and they can repair themselves. There are a few exceptions. So the gastrointestinal tract forms a continuity between our external environment. So they are exposed to liquid toxins and some gas toxins as well, but they're not exposed to light damage. The lungs are exposed to gases, toxins in the environment, but again, not exposed to light. So the skin is the only organ that has to deal with both biological trauma, that is the trauma of biology just being alive, but also environmental toxins, both gaseous, both liquid, and both UV. And so from a cell injury perspective, it's actually quite a fascinating organ. It has to deal a lot with a lot of sources of reactive oxygen species or free radicals. And so my interest nestled there. And that kind of brought me into skin health because a lot of the damage that cells experience in some way or another transforms into an oxidative insult. So a classic example would be light, actually UV light, and UV light causing the pigmentation, which is the very downstream product. So in other words, there are multiple steps that takes light that causes effectively an increase in reactive oxygen species. So UV light is absorbed by these chromophores, these molecules in our skin, and they can heat up and they can emit electrons and cause reactive oxygen species. And the cell gets stressed out because now you have an increase in oxidative stress that causes DNA damage. Then cells respond to DNA damage by producing melanin, and then you go down the pigmentation pathway. So this one example of cell experiencing stress, you can see that the commonality is reactive oxygen species, so oxidative stress. And this is where antioxidants has a massive, massive role to play, because you can block all that downstream effect if you act upstream closest to the target, which is the UV light exposure. And if you want to go beyond that, you use sunscreen. So sunscreen stops the UV, blocks the light, so you don't have to go down. But the best approach is to use sunscreen and an antioxidant. I guess it's a long way of answering that question, but you could see that these cells are not ever damaged, ever so stressed. And from a point of view of redox biology, which is study of antioxidants that I've been involved in for over a decade, it kind of makes sense to steer my research and my passion towards skin health.
Absolutely. As you're talking, I'm thinking about indoor and outdoor furniture. It doesn't seem to matter how much you try to protect your outdoor furniture. It never lives as long as the indoor furniture.
Exactly. Yeah. And the skin's a great analogy. It's always, but again, it's just the outdoor exposure and then the inside exposure as well.
Yeah. Wow. And with this in mind, how did you come to then create Redox Skin Lab?
That was a journey that happened fortuitously. It was during COVID, and I was at my sister's house, and skin serums inherently use antioxidants. And I always had an interest in antioxidants. That's the basis of my research. And we were looking at some formulations that she had recently purchased they could have been done better. And I was like, oh, well, I don't think this is actually very good, because you probably wouldn't design antioxidants in a serum this way. And then I thought, oh, actually, I can head in the lab and I can make you something that I think would work well. And literally, that's how it started. It was just a question, a bit of a fun experiment. And then my interest exploded. And, many years later, it's become it's something that I think about when I wake up and I think about when I sleep.
Oh, that's fantastic. And one of the most fascinating aspects of your work is your focus on senolytic therapy, a term that I'd actually had not heard of before you, but I love the concept for those. Maybe you can explain what senolytic therapy is better than me, but I sort of thought of it as, people say you are what you eat, but maybe you are also what you put on your skin.
Definitely. I think the best way to describe senolytic therapy is a therapy that is designed to kill certain cells. And that sounds a bit something that you would not want to do. But I guess when you put it in perspective, when it comes to cell health, and I think I talked a lot about cells being stressed. And what I haven't spoken about is what happens to cells when they become so stressed because they've accumulated so much damage. And skin cells are most prone to this because of that external exposure, internal exposure, that they simply start to degrade with their activity. So the activity over time goes down, and then they reach a critical threshold, in my pens, where they just stop. And these cells then turn off. And that is what senescence is. And senescence is cells that have accumulated too much damage from either source, and they just don't do anything anymore. They become zombie cells. And so another way to think of senescent cells are these zombie cells that they're alive, but they just don't do anything. The biggest problem with senescent cells or zombie cells in our skin is that, one, they tend to propagate. So they tend to infect the healthier cells around them and transform them to become zombie cells. And two, that they don't die. They just hang out. And if cells don't die, which are sick or which are zombie cell-like, they occupy space that could otherwise be used by healthy cells. So senolytic therapy is a new type of therapy where we are intentionally and selectively killing those zombie cells off so that we can free up the space in the skin for healthier cells to divide and occupy. And it's a type of therapy that I guess the concept arose about 15 years ago. And the major discoveries have been in the last 5 years. We have about 6 clinical trials in age-related diseases because senolytic therapy isn't just for skin, it's for every organ. Although in this sphere, we think a lot about the skin. And the way in which we are targeting senolytic therapy is orally. And so my interest is introducing a topical approach to senolytic therapy and using combinations, again, of antioxidants. Some antioxidants happen to be really great at killing off bad or sick cells. And the particular antioxidants we're talking about is things like quercetin or resveratrol or even curcumin, and there are a few others, pheniston. These are the most researched antioxidants that have senolytic therapy potential. In other words, they have been shown to silence zombie cells and to kill zombie cells. And what's most fascinating is that if you use certain combinations of antioxidants, the effect becomes synergistic. In other words, it's 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of removing those cells. And that's what we're focusing on with our research and with our clinical trials. That we have one of our clinical trials in senolytic therapy, topical at least, in Canberra with one of our favorite clinics there. And we're examining this. And because it's an interesting therapy where it's a therapy that has an interval treatment. So unlike most other therapy, which is I would refer to as maintenance therapy, where you're applying topical antioxidants every day and night to maintain cell health, senolytic therapy is interval. And so you apply it for a short period of time, and it's usually around days to weeks, and then you stop for several months. And the stopping period is the period where you allow these cells to divide and reoccupy the space. And then you might go through several cycles. So it's a very different type of approach to skincare that we currently know. We currently know apply every day for the rest of your life. Senolytic therapy is interval, apply for a short while, stop, and then apply again, usually months later. So it's something that, again, it's very new. I don't think from my knowledge, there aren't any clinical trials done in a widespread fashion. So we thought that, well, if no one's doing it, we should do it. And that's exactly what we've done. And we've got the first wave of we've got recruited almost 20 participants in our study. We've got the first 10 results in. And it's really interesting results. Really, really, when the results come in, the hairs on my hair go up, because it's really exciting to see some changes which were expected, and then some changes which weren't expected. We saw in some of our cases a massive reduction in rosacea in perimenopausal women, which is where rosacea is quite a problem. And then we thought, we kind of scratched our head thinking, what's going on? And, we didn't expect to see a reduction in rosacea or redness in the skin. And then we consulted the literature and we realized that actually quercetin is one of the very few antioxidants that acts as an anti-inflammatory and reduces histamine activation for rosacea. So we could see potentially that dual purpose in this study. I guess when you do clinical studies like this, often you find unexpected results that are quite intriguing. So the results are still coming in, and we're still doing the data analysis. I really look forward to sharing them at some point.
That's fantastic. And I'm assuming that this crosses over to chronic wounds and issues where, people are relying on steroids and whatnot outside of the aesthetic space.
Look, certainly, there's no reason to think that these antioxidants, which have anti-inflammatory activity and in some cases wound healing activity, won't have a crossover and be efficacious in wound healing and speeding up wound recovery, and can replace, in some cases, where in psoriasis or in eczema, they have some utility. And so it's really exciting to kind of see that. And I think we would be looking at that at some point to start to pick out some medical indications where we can move away from topical steroids. The nasty thing about topical steroids, although they are the typical first-line treatment for these conditions, is that they have really nasty long-term side effects. And so if you long-term adherence isn't always is sometimes a problem. So looking at natural alternatives, be it quercetin, and there are other leading compounds that are emerging, is something that is of great interest. So again, a lot of these things, they kind of overlap. But our primary focus now is looking to the effect, the senolytic effect on the skin. So can we reverse aging from the point of view of removing sick cells and then letting enough time for those cells to repopulate, and then also for the skin to then remodel. The skin cells that we are targeting in senolytic therapy, I probably should have started with, is the dermal fibroblasts, because these are the cells that make up the skin structure. Keratinocytes are the cells that and the epidermis of the skin, but these cells that are responsible for modeling the skin and giving it its suppleness and its elasticity is the fibroblasts. And these are highly active cells, and then because they're so active, they're more prone to actually switching off and becoming zombie-like. So the target is, well, let's see if we can remove sick or zombie-like dermal fibroblasts so they can replace themselves. And then the time it takes for them to remodel the skin is the interval time that we allow, 3 months or even longer. And then we go again. And so, that's the approach that we've taken.
That's so cool and so exciting. Now, there's always lots of noise in the skincare space, and whether that's on a clinic level or clinics being inundated with sales reps and multi-step routines and huge product lines. And then obviously we've got Mecca and the supermarket and everywhere else with lots of conflicting advice. How does Redox Skin Lab aim to simplify this process for both the end user and the clinic?
That's a really good question. From our perspective, it's very deliberate. And I think when you're deliberate with your approach and with your scientific question, the answer becomes very deliberate and the solution becomes very deliberate. And so what I mean by that is often the skin concern needs to be articulated. And it's articulated, and it sometimes can be quite easily articulated because you have obvious rosacea or you have obvious pigmentation. And other times it's not so clear. The point would be that when you pick up a product, you should immediately know what is this indicated for. And that wasn't clear to us entering the skin area. So for me, my perspective, I'm a scientist, I really focus on the skin. And when we had to think about the marketing side of things, it became clear that we would pick up a product that had a very fancy name and it was B complex 5 mixed with this and that. It wasn't clear immediately who was this for and who could use it for how long and so that was the immediate problem that we faced. And when we spoke to clinics, it was a problem that they had as well, particularly with a high turnover staff and training and constantly having to retrain them. And so we thought this is the pain point that we were naturally gravitating towards. And so our formulations have just on this side, the indication, this it's indicated for pigmentation. This is really purposefully formulated for pigmentation in mind. And then we've gone further and we've developed our Redox clinical protocols. And this is a pack where it gives you the protocol required to address a very specific indication. And so if you're a client or if you're a clinic owner or clinic worker, simply picking up the pack that is very clearly marked, and it gives you the best strategy for that person to take home, clear instructions on how to use it and how long to use it. And it just really simplified the process. So I think the point would be we were very deliberate with our formulations, with the active ingredients and the delivery techniques to get into the skin. And then we decided to be just as deliberate with the consumer as well. And so that kind of focus, rather than, I guess, kind of mindlessly wondering and looking at which package looks the prettiest or which has the highest height, was the better approach. I think that's the more sustainable. And so far, our clinics have really enjoyed that simplicity. The users have really enjoyed the simplicity. It's made the regime a lot more simpler as well. Not so many products. To further combat this, we also formulated our serums with your kind of staples. And I think of staples as things that these are potent antioxidants. So vitamin C is one, and niacinamide is the other. And so whichever pack you picked up, which was part of the redox clinical protocol, it would always have a night and day serum that had your vitamin C, that had your niacinamide, but it was also formulated with the ingredients that targeted the concern. So you didn't have to have a separate vitamin C serum for maintenance plus the extra one to target your concern. It was combined. And so that's how our range developed over time. We had always vitamin C, niacinamide, but what can we do now to target this specifically for this concern? So yeah, I hope that answers that question. And we're always continually trying to figure out how can we make things simpler? How can we make things easier for the clinic? How can we make it easier to prescribe? And we're evolving that way.
Yes, yeah, which is fantastic, which is what we all want, because otherwise it's just so confusing. And another big confusing topic is oral supplements. You may have heard the marketing term, good skin starts within, but I believe Redox takes a different approach. Why do you believe topical application of active ingredients can be more effective than taking them orally?
That's a really good question. Firstly, I would say topicals have their place. There's no doubt that topicals can go a long way, and it's always context driven. There's some topicals, or so some orals are very, very good, and it can have general health as well. Where topicals can stand out is dose and concentration, and this is particularly important for some ingredients which have tremendous benefit, but are just poorly bioavailable when taken orally. And there are quite a few number of examples, but the two that I would, or probably three that I would highlight, would be fat-loving molecules like resveratrol or quercetin. And these are part of a family of antioxidants called polyphenols. And polyphenols in general are just terribly poorly bioavailable. So in other words, you could take a whole bunch, but the amount that would get into your bloodstream, and then the amount thereafter that would get into the skin, and that amount being functionally a functional dose is quite unlikely. And so you often have to augment the delivery strategy. Sometimes you might take it with a bit of yogurt or some sort of fat to aid the absorption, and that can increase that. But in many cases, it's just not enough. There was a study that was done that compared resveratrol, which is another similar one that has very poor bioavailability. They compared it with oral topical. So oral resveratrol, topical resveratrol, and it was for the treatment of a type of skin inflammatory condition. And the topical was far more superior. And the reason why is that it's just easier to get a good enough dose, a 1% dose topically, and you could at a dose that you could never achieve if you tried to do it orally. And so that has been our approach. Often we can simply get high enough dose topically than you can achieve if you try to take these things orally. So in that respect, topical has its advantage. And it has the other advantage that a lot of these topical agents have UV protective effects as well, because they can absorb a lot of UV energy. So I think it's kind of that two-pronged, but I certainly wouldn't want to dismiss orals, that they certainly have their advantage, particularly oral supplements that can augment or work with our microbiome, and that could have systemic anti-inflammatory effects. And a lot of my colleagues work in this arena, and they're producing fantastic results. Again, for targeted therapy like resveratrol, quercetin, even vitamin C, it's time and time again topical superior.
So for those who are not as scientifically clever as you, can you give us an example with vitamin C? So if I was to take heaps of vitamin C tablets or put a vitamin C rich cream on, which would be better?
Okay, so that's a good point. So vitamin C in our serum sits around 30 micrograms per mil. So that's probably around 0.1, 0.2%. And if you take a lot of vitamin C orally, you would reach a saturation point at about 0.8 micrograms per mil, which is probably around 0.3 or 0.4%. That means that you just can't get higher than that. Your body will flush it out before you even get higher. So you're still sitting at about 0.3 or 4%. Most topical serums of vitamin C are about 15%. So you could never achieve the concentration of vitamin C orally than you could achieve it topically. So that's an example for vitamin C. And there are certainly other examples with other type of actives. Just how much can you get in your serum, and then how much of that is going into your skin, which is kind of the next question. But if you circumvent that and just go straight to the skin, you're more likely to get the dose that you need.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And it turns out you need to drink a lot more oranges than I thought to get the vitamin C you need.
Well, we did the math. So that's an interesting question. 15% of vitamin C is, I think it was around by 200 or 500 oranges. So it was, you just couldn't do it. It was an insane amount of oranges. So
Oh gosh. Okay, I hope my kids don't hear this because I'm like, you're drinking vitamin C, it's good for you.
yeah, oral vitamin C is tremendous. It's something that's what's more. It's probably taking the conversation in a different arena, but oral vitamin C, the optimal dose has never quite been defined. For those science nerds out there who are in this space, know that it was defined as the minimal dose required to prevent scurvy. I think it was around 5 or 10 milligrams per day. That was enough just so that he didn't develop scurvy. But the optimal dose of vitamin C for health has not been defined. But it just turns out that the human body has a tremendous capacity for vitamin C. And vitamin C, I guess, overdosing is almost unheard of because it's so water soluble. It gets flushed out so quickly. And because it gets flushed out so quickly, if you were to adhere to a very strict diet where there was no vitamin C, which would be actually quite difficult to do, it would take about 2 weeks to become vitamin C deficient. So that's not a lot of time. But again, you don't need a lot to prevent scurvy, but you just need a little bit. So I guess you're always better off erring on the higher side of vitamin C if you can anyway.
Talking about balance, and before we move off actives, when is it too young? What age is too young to be using lots of actives? And can you use too many actives on your skin?
Yeah, you certainly can. That's a really great question. There is a trend that's emerging where we have teens and preteens using actives on their face. And in many cases, again, if you are deliberate in your skincare, and this is why I think being deliberate is just so underrated. But if you are deliberate, you won't find many skin concerns in a preteen, apart from acne, and that should be dealt with a clinical professional. And there are certainly avenues for that. But for using things like high concentrations of vitamin C, high concentrations of other actives that have the potential to be disruptive, it's almost unwarranted. It's certainly as a sad fact that we're dealing with this surge of actives. And I think a lot of the time, the actives themselves are not the problem. A lot of the times, it's the solvents which are designed to carry the actives are the problem, and where they can erode the skin barrier and degrade the skin barrier in young skin. It's not designed for this purpose. So there are a few things to think of there, but ultimately, if you do a risk assessment, well, as you get older, your skin begins to appear more dullish. There is a need for actives to prevent the process. But in young skin that is bright and that is useful, you're adding a risk for no potential benefit. That, I think, is a problem.
Yeah, it's quite sad, isn't it?
Mm.
And your work feels incredibly grounded, yet very approachable for the modern consumer, and which is wonderful. Out of all of the products and the research that you've done, what is your favorite, hero product and achievement?
Oh, God, we've been doing a lot. I can talk about this for a while. God, so my favorite product, favorite ingredient is transverse resveratrol. And no doubt, if it's encapsulated at a topical formulation, it's what I use. I don't use many. I only use 2 products a day and night, and that's all. Partly because I'm also, even though I'm a scientist and I'm in this area, I'm also not bothered. So part of it is through sheer laziness. So transresveratrol, such an underrated ingredient, and if formulated correctly, is a wonderful ingredient to have, and so is quercetin as well. In terms of what I'm most passionate about now, I think what's in the works with redox, we're always doing research and development. We have a clinical study for senolytic therapy. We are developing a nanoparticle encapsulated technology, and this is the first of its kind in the world. We've just gotten permission from the supplier that supplies these polymers from in Germany. And this is an interesting technology because it's pH dependent release. So just for those who don't understand what nanoparticles are these tiny little packages that you can trap your drug inside and close it off. And so in a serum of these nanoparticles, there are millions of these tiny little vesicles. And the purpose of this is that one, it protects those active ingredients from the light and from oxygen, so it preserves them. But the other is that if you package this tightly, it could get into the skin where it needs to be. And so what we're working on now is these polymers that are pH dependent release. In other words, you create your nanoparticle, you trap your drug, but the package does not open until it gets inside the skin where there is a shift in pH. Then the package opens up and the active ingredient is released. And this is a really exciting area that we're developing, and we're entrapping active ingredients that need to get into the source deep within the skin where the melanocytes are to prevent pigmentation. And these are the type of ingredients. So I guess in terms of what's new in the area, we're looking at this technology. We're developing this technology. We have our clinical trial in senolytic therapy, and we also have other interests as well. I could talk for days, but I really get excited about this stuff. It's my passion, really.
It's exciting. And for anyone who doesn't know redox, is the redox products better in silo on their own, or do they work well with other treatments, like, for instance, pre and post laser and more ablative procedures? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. It's a good point. Our products were designed to work with clinic procedures, and so we've developed a sub range that is useful for people who have for post procedural care. And this is where we designed our hydro repair gel that was rich in a specific type of wound healing accelerant called beta glucan. And it's a type of sugar molecule that there are various sources of this sugar molecule, but the best sources are either in yeast or in mushrooms. And we've sourced this from mushrooms, a particular type of mushroom called split gill mushroom. And what's been shown is that the type of sugar molecule gets recognized by immune cells within the skin, especially after an injury where you have your skin's appearing red. Your skin's appearing red because the blood vessels have dilated. And when they've dilated, more immune cells are recruited to that area. So the sugar molecule, beta-glucan, is able to trick those immune cells into activating and releasing their growth factors, which then encourages the wound to heal faster. And so we've integrated our serums so that they are appropriate for clinic care, post-clinic care. And then so after a period, for example, of 3 or 4 days, you resume the redox regimen, and then off you go. There's some other areas that we're kind of interested in exploring where we're looking at pre-care. So if you know that you have a procedure in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, there are things that you can do that could actually benefit your recovery and the efficacy of that treatment, which is something based in taurine biology. But I won't go into that. It's something that we're considering, and we can see that there's always these ideas buzzing around as to what we can do. And what's emerging in the science, and there's a lot of things that are really fascinating that have a utility. So for me, as in both industries, I'm still a researcher active. I'm still obviously I'm very deep into skincare now, skin health. I'm trying to integrate what is the latest understanding. What are the newest trends scientifically? How can we integrate this into the clinic and give the benefit before in a timely fashion? And if you look at how long it takes for a publication in the scientific literature to the point that it's transformed into a product, it's about 10 or 15 years. And so there's a lot of lag time that it can take before people popularize an idea. An example is hypochlorous acid. So I see this a lot now for dealing with acne and dealing with microbial loads on the skin. Hypochlorous acid research began topically about 20 years ago. And only now we're starting to see it popularized. And what's emerging in the last 5 years is taurine chloramides, which are a derivative of hypochlorous acid that are actually more stable and have greater benefit. But we didn't want to wait 15 years before we introduce this into the clinic. So we have this product coming out in the next 6 months. And so we see ourselves as the frontier to translate medical findings and into the clinic where we can benefit from them sooner.
That's fantastic. How incredible. So exciting. Lots of exciting things happening.
Yeah, we're only as useful as the clinics that help us as well, because the feedback we get and we're able to think on our feet and adapt. And so I'm really grateful for the partnerships that we've developed and the ones that we are developing currently. So it's really thanks to the people that we've networked through various conferences, the conversations we have, the ideas that just get brought up, and it's limitless what we can think of and what we can do.
That's fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see you speak at the Aesthetic Business Masters in Perth. We're very excited. I'm
very much looking forward to it. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for having me as a guest today.
Oh my goodness, it's our honour. Dr. Chami, thank you so much for joining us, and your passion for science-backed skincare and simplifying the consumer experience is very refreshing and just what our industry needs. So I can't thank you enough. And to our listeners, if they'd like to learn more about Redox Skin Lab, they can follow you on social. And where is the best place to contact you?
Socials, our website, our email addresses is the best way to reach us.
Amazing. And I'll pop all those links in the comment section.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune in. This is Nicole Montgomery, and you've been listening to Aesthetic Business Masters podcast, where beauty means business. And I could not be happier with our chat today with Dr. Chami. Isn't he incredible? I really hope that you have the opportunity to come and learn from him, network, and partner with him at the Aesthetic Business Masters in Perth. Thanks so much.